Hi, and welcome to Uncommon Visionaries Go-to-Market Sessions, a series where we explore the latest trends and challenges facing go-to-market leaders and how to take them on. I'm Jake Randall, the COO of Common Room, the leading community growth platform, and today I'm joined by Tim Hughes, the head of sales at Temporal. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, maybe just to start, it's a pleasure obviously having you on. Would love to just give us a quick kind of intro background on yourself and what Temporal is up to.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Tim Hughes. I've been working in software sales for my entire career, specifically at really early stage startups for the last 8 or so. So I've been the first sales rep at 3 successive companies, and then each of those companies, as we've grown, some bigger and bigger leadership roles. I joined Temporal just over a year ago, and for me, I was really excited for Temporal. Not only just because of the vision of the founders, the amount of time that the product had in the wild, the adoption that had come out of that, and kind of like the whole story that was unfolding in front of us, but it also checked a lot of the boxes that I was thinking about in terms of where do I want to be spending my time in the enterprise software space. And for me, what was important is I wanted to be associated with an open source piece of software. I wanted to be selling a SaaS solution, so I wanted to move away from the complexities and kind of the drag on velocity that going on premise can actually impact in terms of how it can actually impact a company. I want to be at a company that was focused on consumption. So I wanted to remove a lot of the classic friction you see in enterprise sales cycles, where because it has a large upfront dollar tag, it significantly slows down the process by which you can acquire new customers, and those customers can actually recognize and realize value from the product that you're selling. And the last thing I was really thinking about is what's a really big market that you can go after? And you can divide that in lots of different ways. One of the things I would think about in the temporal landscape is we sell to developers. And developers, are ubiquitous. Every company on basically Earth at this point has developers working inside of it. And so that was really exciting to me to, see an opportunity to partner with, legitimately every company on Earth.
I love that. That's great. So you mentioned obviously, you've had a great run at startups, and part of what's fun about working at startups is you're by definition trying to do things differently, right? And you've kind of alluded to that maybe in some of the consumption models. Maybe just to start off, what are some of the most impactful trends that you're seeing in sales and how you're thinking about growing Temporal?
Yeah, so certainly everybody's experienced it. So, I'm working from home. You can probably see from my setup here. That's really changed, especially in the enterprise world where you're selling large dollar values. So now you no longer have, be able to meet in person, make relationships, make personal connections, do a lot of kind of the classic things I would say is a part of a long-term enterprise sales cycle. A lot of that has disappeared, or it's slowly coming back. Or maybe even said differently, it's only happening in very select few cases when you have something that is a mission critical product that is being procured. It's being procured for big dollars. It oftentimes has a consensus type purchase process associated with it, where those personal relationships really matter. And so when you have that constraint and you're thinking about, well, how do I overcome a lot of those tools and processes that I relied on in the past? Tooling becomes really important, and really kind of the mediums by which you actually engage with and meet your end customers and prospects also becomes really important to really think through that. And so when I think about what we're doing here today, it's actually kind of amazing to me that we've been able to close, large accounts for large dollars, almost completely engaging in something like Slack. And in terms of actually keeping a pulse on what's happening inside of those accounts, or how are those accounts organically growing, oftentimes those signals aren't coming from your classic channels like, the platform team that we're partnered with, or the IT organization we're embedded with, or just like our core champions are reaching out to us and saying like, hey, Joe down the hall is interested in learning more about it. Oftentimes those signals are coming through things like Common Room, for instance, where you can actually go in and see, okay, there's net new people coming into our open source community from a current customer. Oh, I can look up what SDK channel they've joined, or what their LinkedIn profile says about them. That's indicative that, hey, this is actually a net new opportunity within that organization. So let's go ahead and actually start forming an approach to how do we want to partner with this person? How can we add value, and how can we assist with the journey that they're about to go on? We've had to recalibrate and reframe and rethink about kind of everything you had historically done. And a big part of that has been thinking about the tools and the mediums that people are on now. And then once you have a good understanding of what those things are, think through what are our strategies that are going to be effective from a sales perspective. And certainly could dive deeper into what I mean by that, but those are a few of the things that come to mind.
We might need to do a follow-up session then, because there's probably a lot of there's a lot of conversations we could have here. So one of the things
Yeah.
you mentioned, and obviously given what I do and what Common Room does, we think community is a big part of that story, right? And so meeting people where they are, whether it be those Slack channels or GitHub or what repos are starring or Stack Overflow. So just spend a minute, and you kind of already alluded to it, but how do you define community for Temporal, and how do you think about that as one of these new channels and this new tooling that you need?
The real long and short of it is that when we think about the success of our business and we think about how we can add value, community is absolutely a huge part of that. So the community needs to grow in order to create a funnel for us to actually engage with and convert into paying customers. And the number one thing I would say that we think about in the community, and I think this is really across the organization, but definitely inside of the sales function, is we need to add value in all of our interactions. And so when somebody shows up into the organization, we're not trying to go ahead and spam you and try to immediately start converting you and talking to you about what's actually, here are the commercial offerings that you could have. Our real goal is to have a genuine curiosity about why you're here, what problem you're trying to solve, and remove this idea that we're here to make money and really kind of just focus on the core component of Temporal can solve real business problems for you. And I'm indifferent if you go down that path of using Temporal open source or Temporal cloud. Really what my first step with you is how do I get you to a point where it's solving actual mission critical problems inside of your applications. And then I have a high confidence or a kind of a high degree of certainty that over time, by being a value add part of your experience inside of our community, that partnership will build into something where we'll eventually have, a real professional relationship where, you're either using Temporal Cloud or some other part of our overall offering.
How has that changed? I'm just thinking, obviously you mentioned working in a commercial open source company, but I think there's a lot of similarities, I'd say, honestly, to what you're saying for like a PLG motion. Basically, the idea is that there's a free offering that we want you to get value, and then eventually we'll convert you. But you've mentioned obviously, community and like Slack as a new channel, and then I love this idea of, I don't know, it's the evolution of value added selling or something, right? That you're talking about. How has the way that you engage with people changed, right? And so, like, to give the example, my guess is you don't have a bunch of SDRs sending cold emails out, given what you just told me, right?
Totally right.
And I think that's a really interesting story, maybe to spend some time on for folks, because if you look at the data, right, SEO isn't converting the same way it used to. People don't, email open rates are going down, but obviously you're doing something correct, and so what kind of learnings almost would you want to impart then on people from that?
Okay, so a super interesting question where you can go into lots of different directions. But let's take it from like a pure enterprise software startup perspective. So if I look at the startups I've been a part of in the past, you build a product, and it's in these cases, say they aren't open source, for instance, or say they are open source but they're very new. You have to go out into the market and sort of start like testing all of these different ideas. You have to go through each single organization and say, hey, does this company at large care about this problem? Are there personas inside of this company that particularly care about this to the point where they'll raise their hand and want to engage with you? Then when you engage with them, can you actually get them to go through this process of like, hey, like, can we actually do some discovery, and what problems do you have, and how big of an issue is that? And can you quantify it? And is it quantifiable to the degree you'd be worth making a change? And that takes a really long time to ramp. And the things that open source or kind of like this old PLG or freemium or kind of whatever approach you're taking to this represent is a faster path to be able to test those ideas. And that's great because you can kind of throw your thing out there and see who shows up. But then you hit this challenge of, okay, now I've actually released this thing into the world, and I don't have to rely on a sales team and kind of a classic, motion marketing, sales, BDR, all coming together and trying to come up with a way to actually penetrate a particular part of the world and seeing if there's a signal there. Now I can throw my stuff out there and see who starts picking it up. But then it becomes a measurement question of, okay, now that I've thrown it out there, how do I actually aggregate all of this information, all of this activity across the universe of addressable places? And when you think about all the places that people actually interact with technology like this, it's pretty vast. So, people spend tons of times on YouTube. They go to Reddit. They're on different Slack communities. They're in GitHub. They're in Discourse. They're in Discord groups. There's this long, long, long list. And it's nearly impossible for you to keep track of it unless you have technology around it. And so, not to be an infomercial for Common Room, but that's really one of the first things that Common Room does is it essentially can answer that question for you. I've thrown a thing to the world, now suck up all the data from all these different data sources of places where people could be touching this thing and organize in a way that actually gives me confidence that, hey, there's a real thing here. And then for us, what we can then say is like, okay, let's go into that view of the world and start asking questions about it. So how fast is it growing? If you want to slice in and dice it, what types of organizations are showing up? And those types of organizations can be looked at, from basic metrics like revenue and employee size to geographic location, all the way into like more interesting things like industries, the personas that are showing up, the types of questions they're asking, and the use case repeatability that might be in there. But what's really interesting and exciting is that the fact of the matter is that lots and lots of people don't engage with an organization prior to them being ready to actually buy your product or evaluate their product. They're doing a ton of research across lots of different mediums to get to the point where they're ready to talk to you. And so what's really exciting about something like Common Room and just a more modern motion is this idea that you can detect that interest prior to them actually raising their hand. And you can start creating channels by which they can more quickly get to you. And when they're getting to you, they're getting to you in a way where you're actually adding value. So you are either seeing what kind of questions and topics or things they're interested in. And so when you're actually meeting them for the first time, you're meeting them immediately with something that they care about. So, I saw you were talking about a low latency use case for, XYZ industry, and I saw it on this medium. Like, hey, Jake, great to meet you. By the way, here's our documentation around that particular use case. Like, take a look at it. If I can be helpful, here's my Calendly link. Let's talk.
I think there's a couple of things you're mentioning here, maybe to highlight. One is the context, right? That's kind of what you're saying, right? Is that, and you should have, the traditional, I'll call it PLG tools. Hey, someone downloaded your open source tool, whatever, right? But what are they doing with that versus if you are in those communities, if you're in those different channels, as you mentioned, whether it be Reddit or Discord or Slack or Twitter or whatever it may be, you actually know what problem they're trying to solve. And that means that you can add value, which I think is a great, kind of where we started on this. And the other thing I just want to touch on is you're really talking about like meeting users where they are, because no one, everyone gets too many cold emails, right? I mean, people still try to like cold call me. I'm like, I'm not going to answer a random phone number at this point, right?
Yeah.
But if you engage in, name a place, LinkedIn, Twitter, subreddit, Stack Overflow, whatever, by definition, like you want to have a conversation. People don't post in those forums unless they want to understand, right? And so the conversion rate, the ability to enter that conversation, assuming you're leading with value, upticks dramatically. And those are all the things that you want when it comes to, trying to convert that massive kind of influx of interest and demand for a tool like Temporal into revenue, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, spot on.
I want to ask one more question because you alluded to it, and then we can wrap up here in the interest of everyone's time. We're not trying to have an hour-long podcast yet, but you mentioned the slicing and dicing, and one of the things that I've loved about working together is the way you're approaching even similar, like, I don't know, very basic things of like territory carving and, sales org planning. Where should I hire someone and why, and that kind of stuff. And, knowing that we're all going into the next fiscal year, right? I'm sure that's on top of mind for a lot of folks right now. And so I just think you're taking a really unique approach. So maybe just tell people a bit around how you've looked at that with some of this new data and tooling that you've talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I think about maybe some of the more traditional approaches to, say, territory planning for an upcoming year, you'd look at your book of accounts, you'd look at the accounts that you have in Salesforce, you'd look at what trends you have inside of your business. You basically take like a kind of bunch of like high level directional pieces of data and then piece together your plan around that. It's like, we do pretty well with financial services firms, so let's staff a bunch of people in New York City or the tri-state area or something along those lines. And that works fine, but again, it's a big mismatch between there can be a very big mismatch between what you guess or what surface level data tells you and then like what in the weeds data tells you. So a good example, if I just continue with that financial services one, is we've had a number of firms who come in and we look at their geographic HQ. And that's where we like sign our paperwork through, and we have contacts there for sure. But then when we actually talk to their users and we understand where their user base is, it's dramatically different. And so it could tell me, hey, we just signed a customer out of San Francisco. Let's hire more people there from a support perspective, from a sales perspective, from a CS perspective, whatever it might be. But then lo and behold, they have 25% of their users in EMEA and 50% of their users are in India. And all of a sudden, now my planning is completely out of whack with the reality of where my engagements are with my customers. And so one of the big things we're trying to do and try to understand more granularly is, can we double click from a planning perspective? Can we double click more deeply into what's actually happening inside of our community and where is it happening, and have that be a core input to how we think about hiring and staffing into the future, and really give us a better chance of, again, it's like meeting users where they are, literally thinking, hey, if you're in, whatever, Central European time zones, it's probably not a great idea to have your core contacts be based on the West Coast of the United States. And also, you can kind of play that story out over and over and over again. So that's like one version of it. The other thing that you maybe think of, anyways, there's tons of really cool planning stuff you can do when you actually start understanding, say, user level behavior as opposed to company level behavior. And then the other thing I would call out that's like super interesting and I think relevant to lots of different firms, one of the kind of key fast net new opportunity creators that I've seen throughout my entire career, and then really what I think is a kind of like it's like a well-known fact in the software world is, when you have a champion leave their company and go to another company, that is a huge opportunity for you to then bring your technology to that new company. And there's, timing things, you got to figure out how to actually go through it, but everybody is always constantly trying to create a way to actually track that. And another thing that I would say that like tools like Common Room actually allow you to do in a systematic fashion, especially when you have a really, really large set of really, really large user base, like an addressable market that's like, developers, is this idea that you have a tool that is actually showing you that movement across time. And when you can start building, repeatable motions around that or real-time alerts around that, that's extremely powerful. And it's like one of these net new ways, I would say, that allow you to at scale track, identify, and create net new opportunities based off of user behavior. And again, in a way that can come and be very value add in a bunch of different ways that I could, more than happy to dive into on the temporal side of how we'd approach it. But like, I think the general story is there.
That's great. Well, I want to be conscious of our listeners' time and obviously yours, to the point
Absolutely.
of it's end of year. I'm sure you got some deals to go close. Just anything you want to say to kind of wrap up here, guidance you would give folks listening, based upon what you've seen in the conversation?
So really what I'm thinking about these days in the temporal, from the temporal perspective is, and the things that actually lead us to our highest velocity and best deals and outcomes, is all of these new channels represent a unique opportunity to get engaged with users in a faster, in a quicker way. But then also when you're engaged with them, it's in more real-time mediums. So it is no longer email back and forth with a bunch of delays, or hoping to book schedule a meeting with somebody 2 weeks out. Now all of a sudden it is oftentimes Slack. And Slack is real time. Most people are actually actively pinging you back and forth, or they're getting back to you in a reasonable amount of time. And then it's also remote, which means that I'm no longer in a meeting and Jake's asking me, hey, how do you guys define your SLA? And I'm like, hey, give me a couple days. Let me get back to the office and pull down those docs and email them over to you. Now I'm just in real time going to our doc site, grabbing that thing and dropping it in Slack. And so your opportunity to materially compress sales cycles, if you are cognizant and aware and well-trained and understand your product and understand the core things that people are going to ask about and understand where assets live, this whole new motion represents a way for you to take this kind of ingrained in everybody's head 9 to 12 month enterprise software sales cycle and start materially smushing it down by just cutting through a lot of the classic back and forth that would drag deals out for months and months just because of the mechanics of how you were engaged. And so that's kind of the thing that I would take away for my first year at Temporal, is there's this huge new opportunity for us to really rethink about how we train, how we approach, and how we engage with folks, and really test, can we move the needle in a material way to increase the velocity of our business.
Yeah, I think this is, obviously, as you know, I love all of our conversations we have together since we've been working together. But I think, just the ability that you've driven at Temporal to, meet your users where they are with that context, with that value. I think it's just really exciting, honestly, to think about those new ways to go to market. So, thank you, as always, for the time. And then for everyone listening, if you want to hear other future conversations with great thought leaders like Tim around go to market, be sure to give us a follow on Common Room on LinkedIn and Twitter. And we look forward to talking with you. Thanks again, Tim.
Awesome. Thanks.